So welcome everyone. My name is Liz Kreidinger and I'm the steward and executive director of the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network. So we're a 25-year-old nonprofit organization. And our mission, simply put, is to advocate for the health of Cayuga Lake and its watershed in a changing world. And we recognize those changes are coming in many forms, right? Including climate change, pollution, and invasive species. And in order to meet those challenges, we need all of you. We need this network of individuals and institutions and communities working together to protect our region's water resources so that it can be enjoyed and used for many generations to come. And so towards those goals, our work includes science-backed education, engagement, and advocacy. And we recognize that that engagement and that education component are really critical to the latter. And so, let's see. Oops, I could get to the next slide. For that reason, the network has been involved in these activities related to invasive hydrilla in our lake since it was first found here in 2011. Over the years, we've organized teams of volunteers to survey shorelines for early detection. We've published over 50 articles, press releases, and newsletters on the subject. We've run radio, social media campaigns, and managed lakeside information boxes. And we also hold stakeholder meetings like today's session. So each year we also update our Hydrilla action and information webpage with the latest links and documents, including presentation slides and recordings like of the session today. And our local programs are designed to keep the community informed and involved in management of hydrilla in our lake, because it really does take this network with lots of organizations and people and resources to keep this aggressive plant from spreading further. So we need this widespread collaboration and resources, and that's why the Cayuga Lake Hydrilla Task Force was created, and it's grown over the last decade. And all the stakeholders here and more work together to help implement the Cayuga Lake Hydrilla Management Plan, but Sam will speak a little bit more about that shortly. So today you'll be hearing from several speakers from partner agencies that are involved in the task force. First, we'll be hearing from Sam Beck-Anderson. Sam is the Associate Director of Invasive Species Programs and coordinator of the Finger Lakes Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. So that's the Finger Lakes PRISM, if you see that acronym around. Sam will be giving an overview of the PRISM briefly and its role in hydrilla management, and importantly, the history of hydrilla work on our lake and the importance of prioritizing prevention and regional invasive species management. We're also very lucky to have Kathy McGlynn, who's joining us from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. She's here with us and is the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator for the DEC. She has a really important role in coordinating hydrilla management strategy across the state and will be guiding us through overview of the state's tools and approach for managing aquatic invasive species with a special focus on hydrilla. And then after Kathy, we'll hear from Rich Ruby, who's a fisheries biologist with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Rich will provide an overview, an update from the Corps on hydrilla control activities in Cayuga Lake. And to keep the program running smoothly, we're going to ask that you keep your microphones muted during the presentations, except when we invite questions. With so many attendees, we're not going to be closely monitoring the chat box this time to keep track of questions, so please just jot them down yourself. And then, depending on the time, we should have an opportunity to open up for a few questions after each of the talks. And then at the end, we'll bring them all back for a Q&A panel where you can bring any additional questions before we wrap up at 2 p.m. And if we don't get to your question today, we will be following up after the event with the recording and a survey where you can share your remaining questions. And we'll be sure to direct them as needed and follow up with you with more information. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sam.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks Liz, for the introduction and to the network for putting this together and hosting, giving us the opportunity to chat with the public and other stakeholders. So as Liz said, my name is Sam Beck-Anderson. I'm the Associate Director of Invasive Species Programs at the Finger Lakes Institute and the coordinator for the Finger Lakes Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. And I'm just going to be jumping right into kind of some background information about Hydrilla on Cayuga Lake. So just to add as a 10,000 foot overview needs to include what is actually an invasive species, what is Hydrilla. The common definition of invasive species is one that is not native to the ecosystem under consideration and a species that actually has an impact on something that is significant, whether that be economic, environmental, or a direct impact to human health. So examples of economic impacts are impacts on things like agriculture and other crops, recreation impact, wood and forest products, trade, shipping, tourism, and so on there. Environmental impacts could include negative impacts to biodiversity or food webs, or just disrupting food webs, structural diversity, natural processes, aesthetics, ecosystem functions, and services, of course. And then finally, looking at human health, impacts of invasive species in this realm can take the form of things like impacting soil health that could affect water quality, water and air quality, flooding, and actual injury or disease or illness to people themselves. So really a lot of this does come back to people at the end of the day. But really what the main thing here is that invasive species have some kind of impact. It's not just something that isn't technically where it's supposed to be. It has to take that one step further to actually having an impact. So invasive species in the context of Cayuga Lake, I think looking at the regional context here is really important. So where are we? Of course, we're in the heart of the Finger Lakes. The Finger Lakes is a large geographic region that is easily accessible through a number of different, metropolitan areas in the northern central New York area, including Syracuse and Rochester. And it has a ton of tourism. There's a lot to share here and a lot that we enjoy as people that live here, and also that people want to travel from. We have people coming from all across the world coming to the Finger Lakes for things like agritourism, wine tours, brewery tours these days, just general recreation, travel, leisure, things like that. But one of these big things that we're always thinking about, of course, are these water related elements and why people come here to enjoy the water. So we have huge, amazing fisheries here in the Finger Lakes, and we have people that are using all different kinds of Finger Lakes. This isn't actually a Finger Lakes launch, but we have tons of people boating here. We have folks that are moving in and out, coming to the Finger Lakes from the Finger Lakes, and kind of always creating the possibility of spreading invasive species. So the regional context here is really important. And looking at kind of this map on the right here, we look at the interconnectedness of users that are using multiple different Finger Lakes. So this shows that a lot of people that are using a Finger Lake, they're most commonly also using another Finger Lake. So these issues of traveling between lakes can get into problematic areas when you're thinking about a plant like Hydrilla. So Hydrilla, also known as water thyme and a couple of other different names as well, has, of course, a broad habitat range. Most commonly in the states found is really commonly found in Florida. That affects a lot of plants. We have there are two different types of hydrilla here in the Finger Lakes region. In the colder climates, we have monoecious hydrilla. This is a visibly serrated leaves in whorls of 3 to 8, and this spreads by fragments. So one of the big traits of a invasive species is something that easily reproduces, and being able to fragment and grow from those fragments is what makes hydrilla so impactful. It makes invasive species so successful at, invading and kind of establishing in a number of different locations. The threats and impacts, possible impacts of hydrilla are pretty wide. It's not just the south where it's really warm, where we have to worry about massive problems coming from hydrilla. This is the Connecticut River, totally infested with hydrilla. Hydrilla essentially grows up from the bottom of the water and actually turns horizontally and can create these really thick and heavy mats that make it really hard to navigate through. You can see that somebody has kind of taken the effort to actually cut a path through this massive hydrilla mat. So the effects on recreation seem pretty obvious, but if you kind of think about fish habitats and ecology, you can imagine that usually this is a more free-flowing river here. This is not really what this is supposed to be doing. So you get into that ecological impact. These are just some estimates here from the Council of Great Lakes governors. This is just overview of what kind of impacts could happen from hydrilla if introduced into the Great Lakes more broadly. Of course, again going back to that regional context, Cayuga Lake is directly connected to Lake Ontario, so it's not just looking at this at a micro level about how this affects individual municipalities or users of the water body. We also care about the impacts that this has broadly on our region in the Northeast and the Great Lakes and so on and so forth. So getting into the history of hydrilla on Cayuga Lake, it was initially found in 2011 and over the years has been found and discovered slowly kind of generally having a trend northward. So a lot of these findings have come from just members of the public. So specifically 2016, and additionally the initial conversation was not found by someone like us. We weren't out there looking for hydrilla and found the first hydrilla. This was found by a member of the public. And I think so going forward, you were seeing that these continue to happen. Even as recent as last year in 2022, we had a general member of the public who happened to know about hydrilla and was scuba diving on the west side near Shedrake Point and happened to find some hydrilla. Lucky enough, he knew what he was looking at and was able to tell the right people about what he found. So the public finds this, we're finding this as well as in terms of, managers, and we're seeing this kind of spreading over time. This is more of a big picture view of kind of how complicated when you kind of break the hydrilla populations down by site throughout the lake, how complicated the management efforts have been here. So what we're looking at here, blue is when years have been, when sites have hydrilla has not been detected at a site. Orange squares are where hydrilla has been detected at a site, and pretty much every square here at the very least has a survey, has indicates where a survey occurred and when a survey occurred. But when you get into the CT and the MT, you're looking at different elements of treatment. So a couple of things to take note of here are to just talk about how complicated the management approach has and how detailed the management approach has been. Looking at some of these sites where we've kind of surveyed for a number of years and then found hydrilla again. So while we've been doing this active treatment, whether it's mechanical or chemical, we're continuing to survey, and then lo and behold, that next year we're finding additional locations. So despite best efforts, it points to how complicated and how difficult it can be to manage invasive species. I think Kathy will be getting into kind of the ins and outs of actually managing invasive species a bit later. It's important to kind of talk about the stakeholders. I keep saying it's complicated, but really when you start to, it's really helpful to look at how many different moving parts are associated with actually the response to hydrilla in just one lake in one state in, the northeastern US. The Hydrilla Local Task Force was the initial responding kind of the response to a concerted effort to manage hydrilla that came out of Tompkins County Soil and Water Conservation District and was largely made up of Ithaca area stakeholders. As time has gone on, a number of additional stakeholders have taken direct roles in the management response to hydrilla, of course, including Tompkins County Soil and Water continues, CCE Tompkins, the DEC, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and of course, us, the Finger Lakes PRISM and the Finger Lakes Institute. What this looks like in terms of as these new partners and kind of stakeholders have been involved in this, the opportunity to sort of take different roles has also come into play, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So this collaboration has led to sort of more specific delegation of management activities to suit stakeholders with what they're actually done. Another response, in addition to kind of this really focused task force approach to bringing together different stakeholders, was putting together a Cayuga Lake Hydrilla management plan, which was completed by the task force in 2021, and really shows a comprehensive approach to how hydrilla should be approached directly and addressed in Cayuga Lake. So this is a really helpful resource when we're just trying to figure out, when new populations come in, when populations are expanding, when we're finding possible eradications at sites, how do we have a concrete tool to actually point to and say, this is kind of where to go next. So I've kind of usually put this at the beginning, but wanted to sort of take the focus away from kind of who we are and just add this at the end for where we fit in. So the Finger Lakes Institute is a nonprofit department here at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, focused on research, education, outreach, and management for contaminants, nutrients, watershed management, and invasive species throughout the Finger Lakes watershed. The PRISM's Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, the programming that really drives the work that we do at the FLI. We are one of the biggest PRISM regions in the state. We are one of 8 different PRISM regions. Our area is actually the size of New Jersey. So if you think, we've kind of been using that recently as like an identifier to describe how difficult it is for us to reach and kind of address some of these different problems, and ties back really closely to how the approach with Cayuga Lake Hydrilla has been so effective and helpful. And I think a really good example of how this can work is by expanding to a number of different stakeholders that have their own networks, so that we can all kind of leverage each other's networks and resources to be really effective. So we have 18 or 17 counties right here surrounding the greater Finger Lakes area. As I mentioned earlier, as kind of collaboration has increased, kind of delegation of tasks has also changed. While we are still doing some smaller treatment projects in active management, we have been able to sort of expand our focus a little bit more on early detection monitoring throughout the region. So, or throughout the region and also throughout Cayuga Lake as well. So these are just some really broad overview stats from our aquatic field teams. This year we had 2 teams working out of our office, and did a number of sites throughout the region, like we said, looking for invasive species, broadly aquatics, but also very specifically on Cayuga Lake. You can see the different management and kind of monitoring sites that we visited this summer alone, including our hydrilla treatment site monitoring efforts, as well as different types of scuba, point intercept, and visual meander surveys. I think that's kind of where I'm going to call it for now, but just want to sort of reiterate how important the different stakeholders are here, and involving the public has been such a huge part of this effort over the years. So we're happy to be continuing in those efforts specifically. So I think I have a couple of minutes for questions, maybe not a ton of time, but.
Great, thanks so much, Sam. So we have a time for 1 or 2 questions just for Sam here. If folks know how to use the raise hand button, you can go ahead and use that, or you can unmute yourself. So the raise hand button is at the bottom of the screen under the smiley face that says reactions. It's one of the primary options there.
I'll also be around if more questions come up later too.
Great.
So
I see that John unmuted himself. John, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if, you talk about networking with other states and other regions and stuff. Has there anybody did any research into what has been done looking at other states, especially the southern states, to see what has been most effective in combating hydrilla? They've had it for a much greater period of time than we have up here. So has anybody looked at what say Florida or Georgia or any of those states have done? and what has been their most effective way to combat hydrilla besides the chemical treatments?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you looked through some of these different management documents, I mean, they're pretty well researched. We're not kind of coming up with this, we're not making this stuff up. We always look to groups that have had experience with this work to sort of identify what we're doing. So the only way we really know how to do what we're doing is looking at other locations. We are aware that there are, a number of different strategies. It all really depends on what the end goal is. And you saw a picture of that, Connecticut River, they're just mowing that, for example. That's obviously an option in some locations. So short answer is yes, we have.
Thanks, John. That's a really important question, and I bet the other speakers can add some more to that as well. Does anyone else want to jump in here before we move on to Kathy? Okay, Kathy, if you want to pull up your slides.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, let me switch to slide mode, slideshow. It'll work. There we go.
Looks good.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kathy McLinn. I'm the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator for New York State's DEC. I work in the Bureau of Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what tools we use for aquatic invasive plant management, and then provide some information about case studies for hydrilla within New York State. So let's get started. So, methods for dealing with invasive aquatic plants. And I'm proceeding with this presentation assuming, if you're thinking about doing control or management, assuming you've reported and confirmed that a particular species is in your water body, always the most important thing, which will dictate the next steps that you take for your management or your decision not to manage. So some key considerations for aquatic plant control. Please remember that every site is different stakeholders, different habitat, potentially different species, different hydrological conditions. There are a lot of variables in each of the projects that folks work on for management. Adaptive management is essential for effective work, which essentially means that you collect data on what you're doing and see how effective it is. And because these are long-term projects, because hydrilla and various other species stay around for much longer than one season, that data can be used from one season to the next to inform the following season's activities. Also note for larger scale projects or projects that have involved multiple stakeholders, particularly private lakes or larger lakes with waterfront properties that are owned by multiple folks, you really want to do your stakeholder outreach and education as a foundation for your project and maintain transparent communication with those stakeholders. And in addition, when you start up these projects, before you even begin your planning, prepare to adjust your expectations for a long-term investment of time, energy, and funds. There is no magic bullet for the majority of these species. And in the case of hydrilla, as we're seeing, it's beyond the 5 to 7 years we normally would recommend for treatment. So each time that tubers are found at a location, that sets the clock back. So key question for most folks who are interested in management is to control or not to control. And I encourage folks to check out this really handy tool from the Nature Conservancy called the Invasive Plant Management Decision Analysis Tool. That will help you think through whether or not control or management is right for you. So first option or a tool for the aquatic plant control, the do nothing option. So if you choose not to do treatment or management of any sort, you would likely have to increase your education and outreach to the public because you'd want to contain that plant in that water body. So you want boaters and recreationists not to transport it elsewhere. And you probably don't want additional species added to your lake or water body. So having education and outreach to the public is key there. You want to emphasize prevention. You want to monitor the aquatic plant growth and spread. And also, right off the bat, accept that there may be reduction in recreational access and other impacts from not treating or managing. Additional tools include physical tools. So there is the option for benthic mats, which we generally use under 1 acre area for a limited time. Please note that those are not selective, so they will impact all of the plants and everything else under them while they're in place. They're not real suitable for flowing water, and you do need a permit in wetland areas. Mechanical harvesting, which has also been mentioned, it is non-selective. There is also the issue of transporting and bringing the, actually transporting it off the water and then transporting again from shore to a place where it can decompose and or be disposed of. So that is an added cost and challenge for a lot of folks who embark on mechanical harvesting. Additional physical controls include hand pulling or diver assisted suction harvesting or harvesting in general. These can have limited effectiveness for plants that reproduce through fragmentation, so there would have to be precautions taken to contain those fragments. It can also impact water clarity and disturb sediment and can be quite costly. So you may need a general permit if working in those regulated wetlands as well. Additional physical tools include drawdowns, also non-selective, very challenging to do with larger water bodies, and they are often conducted over winter. We don't use those a lot, but they have been used in certain locations across the Northeast. And the final I mentioned is dredging, which requires a permit and approval of disposal. So that can be effective for smaller sites, could be quite costly for larger areas. And then in addition, we'll bring in the biological control, which includes insects. So we don't have a lot of options that are approved by USDA EPHIS currently. There is Eurychiox lecontii beetles, which are recommended for Eurasian water milfoil. It is really challenging to maintain the population numbers necessary to control the plants. And also the populations have a hard time overwintering. And in addition, we have triploid grass carp, which is often used as a non-herbicide option for Hydrilla in locations where the carp can be contained and they are not able to be moved to other locations of their own accord. That does require a permit, and there will be a limited number you would be allowed per acre. And the final tool that I will mention, and probably likely the most controversial tool, is the chemical methods. So it is effective at low doses, can be quite selective, often used for large infestations, and can be cost effective as well. Information about regulated herbicides that are used in the aquatic environments can be found at New York State Pesticide Administration Database, or NYSPAD. I encourage you to take advantage of that tool and learn about these different products that are available. For aquatics, we do have a fairly small toolbox. So process for using herbicides to control aquatic invasive plants. Herbicides can only be applied by a certified applicator in Category 5A or someone working under their supervision. Article 15, Part 327 permit for aquatic pesticides is actually required for all projects unless they're under an acre. And we have to do them every year. They have to be renewed every single year of your project and for each herbicide that you're using. So as part of that application process, you're required to notify all riparian owners within that area based on the diffusion model, which is part of the application process. There's also a state environmental quality review, which is needed for the Article 15, and then you would post the results. And in our cases, we would be declaring negative DEC, or negative declaration is no impacts. And in addition, you would have a state pollution discharge elimination system and notice of intent, which also needs to be filed and renewed each year. Wetlands permits may be involved if you're working in a regulated wetland. You may need also a special local need registration for your herbicide. If you're meeting a specific pest problem in New York State, we have, I believe, at least one of those for fluridone, as well as a FIFRA 2EE permit for another project we're working on, which allows us to use herbicides that are not on species that are not mentioned on the label. So we had to work with 2 separate labs to collect data to demonstrate that the herbicide was effective on those plants. And then there may be other permits as needed. So for, say, the Peconic River, we need a wild and scenic river permit, which is another Article 15, and then also the Department of State's coastal assessment form, which needs to be filed with them each year we do the project. So you may be wondering who issues all of these permits. So the Article 15 is issued by DEC, Division of Materials Management, the Bureau of Pesticide Management. They have regional offices where those permit applications are submitted. They also do the state environmental quality review. The SPEEDs is handled by our Division of Water at the Bureau of Water Permits. The special local needs permits and the FIFRA 2EE are handled by Division of Materials Management, Bureau of Pesticide Product Registration. And then there's the general permit for management of invasive species. That's through the DEC's Division of Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Ecosystem Health. Continuing on with our list, triploid grass carp stocking permit would be issued through the Division of Fish and Wildlife through the Bureau of Fisheries at their regional office. Article 24 freshwater permits will be covered by the Division of Fish and Wildlife's Bureau of Ecosystem Health, and dredging permits would be handled by the Division of Environmental Permits. Some of the requirements for treatment: Article 15 aquatic pesticide permit, as I mentioned, requires downstream modeling, which helps us determine who's going to be notified about the treatments. So we'll have the notification sent out when the application is submitted, and our practice is to send out an additional notification right before the treatment occurs so people know the exact dates when that's happening. We also are required to have signage about water use restrictions along the public shoreline during treatment. And in addition, we do water sampling and analysis to ensure we're maintaining a target concentration and not exceeding the range or the exact concentration that's listed in the permit. So we're talking about management here, and I've just taken a little bit of a deep dive into the herbicide application part of it. But I also want to mention to folks who are thinking about doing their own projects or are involved in a group that's weighing in on a project, I encourage folks to do pre and post treatment surveys and monitor as appropriate. So that includes both aquatic plants, macroinvertebrates, and vertebrates if you have the capacity to do that, because it's a great way to assess efficacy of the treatment and to determine, as we like to do, we like to determine if the herbicide is working, if there are non-target impacts. But it also allows us, if we're doing herbicide treatments that I'm talking about for pre-treatment, we also allows us to really target those areas where the plants are found. So that means we're using the minimal amount of herbicide, and we tend to do the treatments earlier in the season when there's a smaller amount of biomass, which means there's less herbicide needed and there's less biomass decomposing in the water, which is really important because you want to make sure you're not impacting dissolved oxygen too much. So we also do, for our projects, we do dissolved oxygen monitoring within and outside of infestation. As we're doing, I mean, that's what I would recommend. We are doing this at one project for us in Peconic River. So I would highly recommend that for folks who are experiencing people who are concerned with dissolved oxygen issues. So doing dissolved oxygen monitoring within and outside of the infestation pre and post treatment. Very, very handy to have that. And again, continuing education and outreach pre-season, during season, post-season, as interest dictates. And again, I cannot emphasize enough keeping folks in the loop about what's going on during the entire season and maintaining transparent communication. And then at the end of this, review your data and revision of plans for next season as needed. As Sam had mentioned in his presentation, you want to focus on adaptive management. So using your first season's data to inform your second season and so on to make sure that you're doing the best that you can with your tools and you're being as efficient as possible. Okay, so we're going to dive into a little bit of Hydrilla in New York State. It is a federally listed noxious weed. Is prohibited in New York State through Part 575. DEC focuses on large-scale projects protecting watersheds. This is a really small list of Hydrilla in New York. So first discovered in 2008 in Creamery Pond in Orange County. The last detection at the very bottom is the Upper Susquehanna River in Cayuga County in 2023 at the mouth of the Owego Creek. So you'll see we have our work cut out for us. Current management plans in place that we're using: the no management option, dredging, grass carp, a combination, which is called integrated pest management, and herbicide. No management options include Suffolk County, and in some of those locations, particularly Lake Ronkonkoma, we are using that as a research site. We're watching how Hydrilla is interacting with both invasive and native plants at that location. But we chose to not treat these sites because they are contained. In many cases, they are contained, and in the smaller cases, the smaller areas, they have outlets to saline environments, so it's less, we see it as less of a risk in those locations. Again, these priorities could change, but for now, that's where we're at with the no management. And no management in Broome County, again, several small ponds not being treated. They're found on private property. They are contained, Prospect Park Pond as well. Dredging, we have one case study provided by Finger Lakes in a private marina in Kings Ferry, Cayuga County in March 2019. Hydrilla has not returned to that area. Grass carp is used in Nassau County at Frost Mill Pond, which is a private lake. Combination of integrated pest management. Monroe County at Tinker Nature Center Pond, we had a benthic mats there. Initially, we had grass carp. We are now switching to herbicide only as of next season. In Orange County, we had herbicide and grass carp. Actually, grass carp followed by herbicide and then no treatment. We are now switching to herbicide. I actually have started as of last year. That's the original location of Creamery Pond in 2008. And finally, herbicide use currently being used in Cayuga Lake, in Erie Canal, Niagara River. We were successful and eradicated Hydrilla in Green and Hickory Lakes, which is located in Erie Canal. Cayuga County, we're continuing to treat Spencer Pond, Little Nanticoke Creek, Upper Susquehanna River, most likely, unless we dredge. And Westchester, we've been successful in removing Hydrilla from the Croton on the Hudson. And New York City DEP is still working on the new Croton Reservoir. So we're focusing on Tompkins County. In Aurora, we're using fluridone pellets and copper. Cayuga County, again, we're focusing on fluridone pellets, Suffolk County, endofol. So you'll see that there's a limited number of tools that we have here. Cayuga Seneca, Tompkins County, and Cayuga Lake, pre-treatment, mid-season, post-treatment aquatic plant surveys, which are done by a multitude of people and agencies helping out with that. Tuber density monitoring, fluridone, pellets and liquid, chelated copper spot treatments, and endofol. Westchester County in Croton of the Hudson, which was completed in 2022. We did pre and post-treatment aquatic plant surveys, tuber density monitoring, liquid fluridone treatment by injection at 2 to 4 parts per billion for 60 to 120 days from June to October. We did drinking water monitoring as the Croton River flows over the aquifer that supplies drinking water to the village of Croton. So that was monitored on a regular basis. And we had an analysis detection limit of 0.3 parts per billion. And just mentioning Erie and Niagara counties, the Erie Canal, we are now leading the eastern portion of the treatment of the Erie Canal. In 2023, we follow through with endofol treatment and a pilot fluoroperoxyphen benzyl treatment, which is known as Percellacor EC. In 2024, we'll be doing a liquid fluridone injection for 60 to 90 days and some spot treatments and some area treatments with the fluoroperoxyphen benzyl and maybe some spot treatments with fluridone pellets as necessary. Niagara River is an Army Corps-led project. They use a combination of fluridone pellets, chelated copper, and endofol. There are 6 known locations at that area, and they are continuing that treatment next year. Sharing more info, Cayuga County, we use fluridone pellets for 10 weeks with some spot treatments. And again, I mentioned earlier, we found an area about 100 meters squared that is in the upper Susquehanna River at the mouth of the Owego Creek, which was hand pulled because it was too late in the season to apply for a permit, will likely be treated with fluridone pellets or dredged next year. So focusing a bit more on prevention, which is really where we want to be, but again, prevention is not 100% successful. So we have a protect your waters and clean, drain, dry messaging. We have a watercraft inspection steward program across the state. We also are engaging in more and more in organisms trade education and outreach. So here are some of the products we have under our Protect Your Waters branding. Our target audiences being aquatic recreationists, aquarium pet owners, aquatic gardeners, and we have life releases. Our boat steward program is actually funded by EPF, and then there's also some statewide AIS spread prevention grants, which help with funding smaller locations at lake associations. But a statewide program funded through EPF has about 250 locations. And this past year, we did more than 215,000 boat inspections. So that is in support of the Reasonable Precautions, Part 576, as well as our AIS management plan. Organisms in trade, we're currently focusing on aquatic gardening, aquaria and hobbyist folks, some bait sales and life releases. We will continue to expand that as we have more time and capacity. Detection and response. We have a rapid response policy for any detections. We are focused on that in the Bureau of Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health, where I work. We also work with our partners for Regional Invasive Species Management, who have their own teams who do surveys and early detection and rapid response as well. In addition, parks teams, their invasive species strike teams, are also involved in this work. We have our own regional staff now. Our Bureau has regional staff in Region 3 and 9 and 1, and we'll soon have, again, regional staff in Region 7. So those folks also help with the detection, the surveying, monitoring, and the response. Please note that DEC staff in our particular aquatic invasive species unit, by next year, all of our current staff will be certified applicators in Category 5A, and we also now have, our Bureau now has a commercial permit for the purchase and distribution of herbicides. Future plans, as always, reassessment of management methods for smaller infestations when needed, continued focus on prevention and early detection and raising public awareness, and again, being involved with adaptive management. Remaining flexible regarding control methods, always nice to research new ways to reduce the amount of herbicide you're using, or somehow integrate more integrated pest management into your management plans. Continued communication across state and international borders. We work closely with the states across the Northeast and the Great Lakes and the Mid-Atlantic as part of the federal ANS task force. So we do communicate with those folks. We also have been in communication with Canada regarding the Niagara River Hydrilla infestation, so they are keeping apprised of everything that's going on there. And we are also working on a New York State Hydrilla management plan. So I'd just like to acknowledge partners who are on the ground crews who are involved in these projects the last season: Army Corps, Fish and Wildlife Service, Finger Lake PRISM, Western New York PRISM, Cayuga Lake Watershed Network, our DEC folks, Lindsay Yoder in Region 9, Steve Pearson here at Central Office, and Mike Robinson, Region 7, the former Region 7 AIS coordinator. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions if we have a bit of time.
Great, thanks so much, Kathy. That's such important context to be setting us up better to understand the management program on Cayuga Lake, and I'm looking forward to diving into Rich's updates after that. Can we open it up? Does anyone have questions for Kathy? We have time for a few before moving on. Brian, go ahead and
Thanks,
unmute.
Liz.
Yeah.
I was with the EMC in 2011 when Hydrilla was first discovered here. Several of our members had Cornell-specific degrees in issues of biological control. We tried to get more interest in what the opportunities were there. We knew that there were successful programs in Southeast Asia, but we never really managed to get much interest. I worked with New York Coalition for Alternatives of Pesticides and did a lot of meetings with Farm Bureau people in the 90s. And we did get the notification process set up in New York State, but not really have much impact on the use of pesticides. So I'm just wondering, in the last 5 years or so, has there been further investigation in biological controls on just growth and possibilities? We're not definitely favorable to grass carp. They're a whole nother problem, but I'm not sure the insects are an alternative very well either if they can't overwinter. So I just like to know what the potential possibilities for biological control are today.
So to date, Army Corps is leading the charge. So they have a number of folks in their research division that are basically making trips to Southeast Asia and bringing back insects. But as you know, the process for getting biocontrol approved through USDA APHIS is incredibly time consuming. So it may be quite some time before we have those little critters on the water. But I definitely say that Army Corps has been quite active in that.
Thanks, Brian. We have time for another. If anyone wants to unmute or raise the little hand. All right, great. I'm sure we'll have some additional questions at the end once we all bring you all back. So next we'll welcome Rich Ruby from the Army Corps of Engineers. Rich, you can go ahead and unmute and do a slide share. Hey, that looks good. You want to give the audio a test?
Okay, can you hear me now? I just lost the audio as soon as you wanted me to jump on. So thanks, Liz. Appreciate it. Let's see here. See if I can share my screen.
All right, okay. Looks good.
Perfect. Okay, thanks again. Again, my name is Richard Ruby. I'm the lead biologist on the Hydrilla work that's being done in Cayuga Lake. I work hand in hand with Michael Wyers, who's another biologist who does most of our Niagara River work and is also taking over the project management duties from Mike Greer, who has stepped up and is now down at our Vicksburg Engineering Research Development Center, actually being the national program manager for all of the invasive species control efforts that the Corps does, including Hydrilla still. So one of the key things Kathy's touched on, I know it's been raised, John raised it, and a couple others have raised, John Lorenz raised a question about the types of technologies that we use here. We did early on when the Hydrilla was first found in the lake back in 2011 or so, 12, our Engineering Research Development Center at the Corps, we actually had at that time, unfortunately he's passed, but we've since replaced with similar people. But we had one of the world's leading scientists on hydrilla control, and especially monoecious hydrilla, which is the form that we have up here. That he actually got involved with not only the Cayuga Lake treatments, but also the Niagara River stuff, where we found that at a comparable time. And being from Florida and being down embedded at the University of Florida's plant control, plant management program down there, he actually did come up and helped advise the locals on all the different technologies, including mechanical controls, benthic barriers, as Kathy alluded to, the fact that we do have a very limited amount of biocontrols currently to control hydrilla itself, and then the monoecious form we have an additional issue with because of the fact that it dies back to those tubers over winter, so there's no plant matter or anything for certain of the organisms to actually hang on to and to survive the winter, and then we have these very cold times too. So the monoecious form of hydrilla adds another interesting wrinkle when we're talking about biocontrols, in addition to just as Kathy alluded to, the difficulty in actually getting them registered because of the potential impacts they could have on other species and on the ecosystem. So that limited us to using a suite of herbicides that in an attempt to try to target hydrilla, the advantage is as Kathy alluded to, is that some of the herbicides have been used for a long time, have been shown to be relatively safe, especially for humans, with regards to their application, especially if done at low enough concentrations. And the advantage that we have here with hydrilla is there's a specific time of the year that we can actually go after it and try to knock it out so it it isn't able to produce those vegetated tubers for the next year. And that's really what we're trying to do, is actually exhaust the tubers that have already been established in the sediment. Those unfortunately last for up to 10 years. So it's a long-term process, but you try to knock those plants out that do generate from the tuber bank, and you knock them out that year, and then you hopefully do not produce any new tubers. So over time, you're actually reducing the amount of tubers. And that also, Hydrilla happens to be relatively susceptible to certain herbicides at lower concentrations than are some of our native plants. So we can actually target not only a range of concentrations, but also the timing of those applications to try to reduce as much as possible impacts to the native vegetation. Albeit we are going to impact some during that time, but if Hydrilla is allowed to go unchecked, the fear is that it can do what has happened in other areas, especially down in Florida and some of those lakes where it has expanded out and become a monoculture, caused major issues with regards to the ecology as well as the water quality of the resource. So the three herbicides that we generally on an annual or I guess the two types of herbicides, but the two different formulations in one case, is because we're dealing usually around potable water intakes. We use either fluridone, which is a long-term systemic herbicide where the plants have to be exposed to that for usually up to 60 to 90 days or so during the growing season in order for that to be effective. And then we also have a very quick-acting contact herbicide in chelated copper. We try to reduce or only use this in very, very small applications because copper is much less selective, has a much wider range of impact. So we really try to concentrate that on just the area, just the patches of Hydrilla that may not be responding to the more traditional sonar applications, which we're doing at relatively low doses for an extended period of time in order to try to impact the Hydrilla as it's emerging from the sediment, and then as it's growing, we're weakening it. It ends up over time just reducing the plant's ability to create food, and so that it actually starts to bleach out and then eventually dies back, or weakens to the point that it doesn't have enough energy to be able to produce those potato-like tubers that we talked about. Copper has no restrictions except for less than 200 parts per billion. Usually we're applying at 1 part per million or 0.75 part per million. So in those very concentrated areas, we would be above the drinking area, but we only do this well away from any potable water intakes or any areas, and it's a really concentrated area where we're doing that. All of the other restrictions that we have with regards to this is usually less than 1 parts per billion, which ironically that's usually where we're dealing with our concentrations of this less than 1 part per billion, even though we're applying on a weekly basis, usually at about 20 parts per billion or less. That's the max we're allowed with a potable water intake. And then you can see New York State actually restricts any concentrations of herbicide above 50 in a potable water intake situation. So the only place where you have to worry about the above 1 part per billion is potentially certain types of tomato plants and certain seedlings, and that if irrigated with that can be affected by that. And that's part of the whole permitting and notification process that we do when we do any application. We send that out to all of the adjacent water users, property owners along the lake, to let them know where we're actually doing it and when we're doing it. And then we post signage at all public access areas so that anybody publicly using the resource knows that we have applied and when we've applied. So I'll start with Aurora, which has been an area that we've been treating now since 2017, 2018. The area originally started this is where it was originally found up here, was in Wells College Bay, right near the Wells College dock. Dr. Johnson actually went out, did some evaluations, and found that it was actually pretty well established in the bay. We've been treating that, and we've knocked the abundance of the plant down significantly in that area. However, due to the amount of traffic that it goes in there, both recreational as well as just the plant itself, with it fragments, it moves, and the general movement of the water obviously through here is actually to the north. So we have seen fragments and patches begin to extend farther north. Now most of those patches, at least the ones that we treat, DEC actually takes care of the southern patches in this area for us, because the area originally started at about a 60-acre area that we treated, and now we're treating a couple hundred acres of area over an extended about 700-acre area. So the area is extended out that we monitor, and we're applying or we're having to treat in certain areas, but we're still really concentrating just on the areas where we actually have found hydrilla. So this year we actually did applications for the first time north of the up near Mackenzie Childs and that bay there in Lavana, and then also Ellis Point around there, and then we actually went as far north up to the embayment to the north, which is actually, after we met with the fishermen, is a very popular area for fishing and stuff like that. So I'm happy to report that the applications were successful there, and we did not find any hydrilla there. So the this coming year, we are probably going to pull back our applications and actually concentrate on where we found hydrilla, which I'll show you in just a minute, and try to concentrate in those areas. Assuming that we never found a rooted plant here, and the finds that were found there the year before were not verified as being rooted plants. They were actually fragments, so they may have just been fragments that got caught in that vegetation, because that bay is really shallow and has a lot of vegetation in it usually. So it could have been just fragments of hydrilla that drifted in there and never established, but it actually got caught, and we just happened to sample them when we were in there looking for it. So as a result, we're probably going to pull back this upcoming year, and actually try to reduce that. And when talking to the fishermen, we told them that we're trying to protect hydrilla from getting up into this northern area, recognizing that this northern area, not only is it difficult for us to treat, it's also a very highly valued area for the fishermen in this area. So we are going to try to pull back and try to concentrate on keeping hydrilla south, and try to knock it as far back down the lake as we can. The treatments that we did up here were our normal application schedule. We usually start right at the end of June. We do 2 applications right up front, 20 parts per billion on a weekly basis. These are slow release pellets. It takes them several weeks to actually fully release all of the herbicides. So the reason we're applying at that higher 20 parts per billion is so that we can try to achieve a 3 to 5 parts per billion if we can at the sediment surface. These are pellets that fall to the bottom. They'll hang down near the bottom of the sediment, and that's where we want it, because that's where hydrilla, when it's starting to emerge, that's where it's going to actually take the herbicide in and it have the most effectiveness onto it. After the 2 applications of 20, then we drop back down to a 13.75 part per billion treatment, and we apply that for the next 8 weeks. As I said, this is a long systemic type herbicide, long acting, so it needs a long time for it to actually have an effect. This is not a quick acting contact where you apply and within a few days or a week or 2, you see the plants die off. This takes literally months for the plants to actually be impacted enough to die back. So we usually start seeing impacts on the plants in August from applications that we've done throughout the month of July. The southern part of our area, which is actually near the Wells College dock, in that area, it starts right near where Wells College, just north of Wells College dock. In this area, rather than doing, we have an area where it's a little more sheltered, doesn't have as much mixing. We also have areas where we're dealing with the plant is actually deeper water. So we have it in some shallow areas, which is where we normally find it. But we also have it down to 15 to 16, 18 foot depths in this area. So it drops off a little bit quicker. So because we are using a pelletized form of this herbicide, rather than doing full water column calculations, we actually worked with the herbicide with the applicator companies, and we came up with a treatment schedule to reduce the amount of herbicide that is being applied from our normal maximum of 150 parts per billion, which we're allowed by the state and by EPA to apply at for the full season. We actually reduce that to try to save on herbicide, reduce that, and hopefully get the same impact onto the plants as we see in other areas due to that lower mixing and some things that we saw from years before. So in the shallow area, which is anywhere between 12 feet and less, average depth around 6 feet or so, we reduce it from 10 weeks to 8 weeks, and then we do 20 part per billion applications for the first 4, and then the next 4 we do only 10 parts per billion. So that works out to be 120 parts per billion total. So we're using less herbicide in this application here and checking to see if we actually get similar impacts. Part of the reason for this is obviously that if we get success here, we may be able to extend that and use that in other areas as well. But again, here it's a lot less mixed than it is up at Ellis Point and some of those areas there where it's more exposed to a lot of the wave action and winds. The deep south treatment, which is those areas that are deeper than 12 feet, average depth about 16 feet or so, they actually got 4 applications, still an 8-week treatment instead of the 10-week that we do normally. And we did an average of a 10 part per billion to start with for 4 weeks, and then an 8.75. So that works out to be a total seasonal application of 75 parts per billion, which is actually half of what we normally do in other areas. And again, trying to see if we get good concentration holding and get a well-timed application of this early in the growing season when the plants are just starting to emerge, and treating them long enough so that those impacts weaken the plant or kill the plant so that they're not able to produce those tubers later in the fall, to see if we can actually use less herbicide and have similar impacts. It's good for budgets, it's good for the environment, it's good for all parties involved. So we're trying to see if we can actually do that and reduce what we're doing there. As we're required by the state and as we have to monitor, we weekly monitor the treatments in order to make sure that we're not exceeding the 20 part per billion maximum that we're allowed in the potable water intake areas. And so that we're also monitoring that for efficacy from our standpoint to make sure that we actually are getting that increase of herbicide and holding that herbicide in that hopefully 3 to 5 parts per billion range in order to get the maximum amount of impact on the plants. We monitor at least 2 or 3 sites within our, at least every quarter to half mile. We monitor along these long, narrow areas. And then we also monitor a half mile from the either southernmost or northernmost application of herbicide. And because we were using fluridone in the northern end, that was our northernmost point to start with. And then in the south, DEC actually treats the southern end down to Long Point State Park. So we actually did the treatment, or did the sampling south of there as well. And then we also have finished water samples that were taken at the water plant at Wells College. They were taken and sampled and analyzed weekly, and none of those actually demonstrated any detection of herbicide from where we were applying. I guess the other thing I'll note there with the monitoring is that generally speaking, the range of values that we saw was mostly between 1 to 5 parts per billion. We didn't exceed that. We did have some errant numbers early in the first couple weeks that we shared with the health department, with the DEC from our contractor. We worked with our contractor to determine why they were seeing such high values. They were seeing values even higher than what we were applying at. And come to find out, we're pretty convinced that there was some cross-contamination going on. So we worked with the contractors to actually went out ourselves, verified with our water sampling that we weren't having any issues with the applications being higher than they should be. We then worked with DEC and worked with the health department to set up more sampling to make sure that we did that. Also, just because we exceeded that 1 part per billion at the North Lake point, even though our sampling showed nothing, the contractors did. We actually extended the sampling an additional 1/4 mile and then did it again each time, coordinating with the health department and with DEC to make sure that they were involved, and we notified all additional landowners of the treatments as a result of the detections that we were getting from the contractor. Once we fixed the issues that we were having with the field sampling, we never got another detection from that. So it was some cross contamination that was occurring with the sampling techniques that we worked with the contractor to fix. This is this shows. So we sampled. This year we sampled approximately 740 acres of area with the help of DEC, with the Finger Lakes PRISM, as well as with Fish and Wildlife. We did the first couple monthly our treatments, our monitorings we did in late June and July. The Corps did themselves, and then we did large coordinated efforts with them for the entire sampling area. So that what I'm showing you here is just the northern portion of that the Corps monitors, which is a 480 acre area. We did that. We monitor that usually once a month, tossing a rake, looking for for hydrilla at points, a point grid that we set up. And the point grid for this area was anywhere between 1,700. For our area was 1,740 points. And then when we did the full entire area, which accounted for over 700 acres of area, including the DEC portion, that increased to over 2,700 points. So in 1 week, we would throw 2,700 rake tosses and monitor the plants looking for hydrilla. What you see here is, although we have a spread of hydrilla, that we found it back again right near just south of the bathing beach at Wells College. We found a couple hydrilla hits there. There was some small patch that was there. And then we also, if you look, you can see there's a little patch that is just past Ellis Point, but not nearly up to the cove. So what we're probably going to do in the majority of the hits that we had were actually in the Mackenzie Child area. So this area, we're probably going to do more extensive application to go, because it looks like the plants are they're being impacted by herbicide, but not as much as they were in other areas. So we're going to have to concentrate more in this area. These were just two plants. So what we'll do is we'll just continue to apply here and keep an eye on that, probably pull this back, and then we'll continue to try to treat these plants. Nothing was found in these areas, which is really good. So we'll probably move this down and actually concentrate on the area where this is where the original infestation was, and it's not uncommon for a plant or two to pop back up, still just trying to exhaust the tuber bank that was found there in 2016, 2017. So we're still dealing with that tuber bank that was there. But overall, as much as that looks like, we've got we do have hydrilla that has spread out, and we have now think we're pretty comfortable that we've found the northern extent of it. Luckily, it has not gotten into that northern area that we all are trying to make sure that we keep it out of. It looks like it has extended up north from Wells College, and it's now at a little bit higher concentration in this area. But it's still, when we first got out to work on this project in Wells College, we had patches that were growing to the surface, and when you threw a rake toss in the bay itself, Wells College Bay, we were getting anywhere between 30% and 50% occurrence of hydrilla. Now we're getting, overall through this whole area, we're seeing 1% or less. So yes, we have hydrilla spread out over a larger area, but the hydrilla that is spread out over that area is being controlled and is actually much lower abundances. So it's keeping it down so it's not having the significant impacts it could have if we allowed it to just go and become the monoculture that it can become as it does in some areas. Just as far south as just in Pennsylvania, where we work with Pennsylvania a lot to do that. So that's what this is, and then this is showing you the overall sampling that we did for the entire grid. This is the full 740 acres or so that we looked at, and you can see I don't have DEC's treatment areas on here, but I know DEC does treatments through this area, and then this area is just outside of one of their treatment areas. So we do have Hydrilla still in this area that still will need some application, some treatment on, but it doesn't look as though right now as though it's spreading out beyond where we found it a couple of years ago. So it looks like we found the extent, and hopefully we can kind of knock it back and keep it at that low point. That'll take any questions on Aurora, and then Ithaca will just be a quick short because there's not much going on in Ithaca, luckily. So.
Thanks, Rich. Folks can feel free to unmute if you have a question about the Aurora or Cayuga County treatment areas. All right, I think you can keep moving. Thanks.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so we also, excuse me, we also have been treating down in Ithaca. We moved down and started helping out with some patches that Racine Johnson, that Bob Johnson found during surveys that he was doing in 2018, 2019. So we've been down here. We had originally some patches that had popped back up in outside of Stewart Park. And then there were some areas within Fall Creek, including the Golf Course Lagoon. There was an area here that was found, and then we also have some in the inlet itself where the original infestation was as well. That we've had some persistent patches in that we've been doing applications at. This is the launch right there at Tremont State Park. We also had some patches out here, which are probably from fragments that came down here. This is the marina and the outlet of Cascadilla. So you have the new marina here, and we do see we had some patches in that along this area, as well as this is the Cornell Crew area, and we have a lot of boat traffic there and have had fragments there almost on an annual basis. So we treated, for the past several years, we've treated Fall Creek two different ways. We use a liquid version of sonar. It's Sonar Genesis that's injected down here at the Route 13 bridge. And with flows, we maintain about a 2 to 2.5 part per million. It should be part per billion flow, excuse me. 2.5 part per billion flow or application through this flowing water area. Because of the fact we are applying herbicide and it's moving down the creek, we actually oftentimes use a lower concentration of sonar granular that we put out into these out-pocketed areas, these off-channel, off-current areas that don't really get a lot of current, so they're not being treated. But what it does do is that it actually acts to hold the herbicide in better, so we can use lower concentrations there to treat these areas. In the past couple of years, we have not seen any hydrilla in these areas, and I'm happy to report we didn't find any in these areas again this year. So we did have some issues with our injection system having a stuck check valve, and so we went through our herbicide a little sooner than we had anticipated, and we worked with the applicator and the chemical company whose equipment it was that with the injection system, and they actually did provide about 30 more gallons of herbicide to extend the treatment long enough to make sure that we got the treatment that we an effective treatment long enough to, if there were any issues with hydrilla through this area. But like I said, I'm happy to report it looks like for the past at least 2 to 3 years, we've found no hydrilla in here. And so we're getting to the point where we're probably going to start pulling back our applications now and just concentrating on the areas where we know we have some issues still. This is the, we used to have a patch up here at the sailing club. We also used to have patches along here. We have not found any in the past several years, so we pulled our applications back, and now we're just doing it at the outlet where we have had some hydrilla in the past year, a couple of years, but we did not find any this year, which is good. Again, using a little bit lower application rate because of the fact that we're taking advantage of the water that's being treated with the liquid form. This is an area that is heavily vegetated, and we did have some hydrilla in this area. In previous years, we kept it just for one more year, just because we know we do have fragments coming out of the Cascadilla area, and so we wanted to make sure that any area, slower area where these fragments may settle out would still get an application, just to make sure that we didn't have any establishment. We go to the inlet. The inlet actually received our standard because it is a flowing. It does flow back and forth. At lower flows, sometimes it actually, or northerly winds, it will actually inflow and rock back in. But generally, the movement is flowing from south to north. The marina, or excuse me, the launch area. This is the marina. This is the Cascadilla Creek where we do some applications, and we've had some significant patches along this area where the co-op market is, and then we also often have had some hydrilla along this edge, and then we've had patches in here. Standard application timing, and we had a very effective treatment in all these areas, except we did find in the last treatment, our last monitoring we did in October, we did find some hydrilla down in this area, and I'll show you that in one of the next slides. Same thing as up in Aurora. We monitor on a weekly basis these sample sites to make sure any of the areas where we're applying that we're making sure that we're not exceeding, and that hopefully we're getting an increase in the herbicide application to make it about in that 3 to 5 part per billion area. Down here, because we have 3 different areas, we concentrated. The health department told us, because of the flowing water and the way it generally goes, we do not have to do our southernmost point. So we only did one along this shoreline and one along the eastern and the western side. After talking with Don and at DEC Region 7, they requested, even though we did do notifications through here, in order to remove that notification, they asked if we could sample down in that half-mile south. So we went down, did one sample at the not long after the initiation of the treatment, which we had no detectable herbicide. It was less than 0.5 ppb, and we went back then at the end of the application and did the same thing, so that we knew that the applications did not exceed that 1 part per billion. We didn't have to extend it down or our notifications. So this is a great project in the fact that we work hand in hand with all of the project partners, and we're very open when things are going on and coordinating back and make sure we keep things on track at where we're going. And I think that's one of the reasons we have been successful here, but also it's just been really good outreach with everybody and really good communications with everybody, making sure that these applications are done in a safe way and have the maximum impact on what we're going after, which is hydrilla, and the minimal amount of impacts on anything else. So as I said, our point intercept sampling, which here we do about 420 points every month, start in late June and go through to October. And our October samples, we did actually find hydrilla. We found hydrilla right in the center of the Cornell Crude Bay area, which is right near one of our water sample points. I think we hit it perfectly because we threw about 25 more rakes around that and never found anything more. So it's very, very turbid here. So it's very difficult to see. The water is almost like chocolate milk. So so we threw as many rakes as we could and did that. And then we did have, you can see right here on the map, even you see there's a tracer. The water clears up a little bit because this is a little deeper. And right at this point, we did find a patch of hydrilla as well, which we'll have to address next year. For next year's treatments, we are going to start working with our partners on that and doing that at the end of the calendar or at the beginning of the calendar year. We are probably going to pull the Cascadilla Creek treatment. We're going to pull back on these treatments and make them smaller, and then we'll concentrate our efforts in the inlet itself, where we have consistently had hydrilla hits, albeit only a few, but we've had them around the Cascadilla Creek area and that Cornell Crew Bay area. So that's it. With that, I think I'll wrap up. Yep, we're going to complete our summary reports, do more data analysis of the, because we're also collecting hydroacoustics, both in the treatment areas as well as outside. So we're analyzing that information, and I'm going to try to have some mapping that shows the changes in the biovolume or the amount of plants both in our treatment areas as well as concurrently outside of our treatment areas, so you can see any changes that happen within there, within those two areas, and that overlaid with our point intercepts, we can actually say what type, what species, or at least have an idea as to what types of plants are actually probably in those areas. In Aurora, we're going to still address and concentrate on making sure that that hydrilla does not extend any farther north and get up into that northern part of the lake that is very highly valued by everyone. We also are going to, we'll concentrate on Ellis Point and Mackenzie Childs. And like I said, we'll probably pull that Upper Bay back. And then in Ithaca, we're going to pull our treatments even tighter in and really concentrate on the inlet area in the hopes that we can, that we're concentrating the treatments just where they need to be and not doing them in areas where, although we've had hydrilla in the past, it does not appear that we have any more tubers to have to worry about. DEC last year did do tuber sampling in at least the areas in Cayuga and Ithaca, and 50 samples were done at locations where we've found hydrilla and no tubers were found. So the tuber bank there is getting exhausted to the point where we would have to do many, many more samplings in order to address that. So that's good news. We have a good news story in Ithaca. It looks like we're starting to get a handle on it, even though it's popped up in another area in the inlet, still contained. And Aurora is a good news in the fact that it looks like we finally have found the northernmost extent of that, and we're going to hopefully try to push that back down and keep that, either remove it from the upper part if we can, or at least keep that low enough so it doesn't become a problem and continue to extend to the north. And with that, I'm done.
Great. Thanks so much, Rich. I'd like to open up the floor to anyone who would like to ask Rich a question about the treatment program that he just outlined, or about any other sort of the background or framework that the Corps is working on to implement that project. I have a question to kick it off if folks are still digesting some of that information. Rich, could you speak a little more to the importance of keeping hydrilla out of the north end of the lake, and not just ecologically, but also relative to current management that's being done for macrophytes in the north end? I know some of the counties have, and Seneca County specifically, as doing mechanical harvesting in that area. Right.
Yeah, so I mean, from our standpoint, just looking at it, the biggest thing that we noticed was the lake really shallows out there, meaning there's a lot more habitat potentially available for hydrilla there. It's also close to the lock and the canal system, and obviously we don't want to see it get into the canal and then it pretty much has a aquatic highway to go anywhere in the state, which is why we've been fighting as much as we have on the western side of the canal and now into the upper Niagara. And so, you know, from our standpoint, it's really just, even if you're looking at it just from a control standpoint, we're just trying to keep it away from really good quality habitat. And then you add the fact that after we went out and talked to the fishermen, and we were aware of this before, that northern end also is a very, very highly valued fishing area because of those aquatic plants that are out there. And the last thing we want to do is be out there and having to deal with hydrilla getting to that area, potentially having some major changes. Initially, it will probably you know, improve things a little bit or make the fishing a little easier because of just the growth habit that hydrilla has. It's one of the reasons why down south in certain areas they do manage it. Sometimes in certain areas they allow it, in other areas they try to keep it in control to maintain that biodiversity, because of the fact that hydrilla grows, especially monoecious, grows in these large curtains, and so it concentrates predators, game fish, be it bass, be it pike, be it walleye. It'll concentrate them along those edges and basically make it easier to find those fish. A natural vegetated shallow will produce the same amount of fish. It's just they're sprinkled throughout it because it isn't like that. Hydrilla, on the other hand, grows so dense that it's hard for those fish to be able to get in and do that. So they tend to hang on the edges and on the edge habitat, and so it just makes them easier to mark and easier to go after. So it's a standpoint that it makes it, you know, a little bit nicer to fish for than in other areas. But there are some negative impacts that come in with the hydrilla, especially for the other users of the resource. So
Thanks. Roxy, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for that great
Hi,
talk
Roxy.
and for everyone's talk. I had a couple questions. So the original goal of the hydrilla treatments was eradication in the south end of Cayuga Lake. And you've definitely demonstrated that there's been some gains made, but some spreading too. Is that still a plausible outcome? And if it's not, what is the plan for permanent management to protect neighboring Finger Lakes and the Great Lakes?
Well, that is a great question, and something I know that Kathy, which I would definitely defer to Kathy, because I know Kathy has actually been having you know, more lake-wide management type meetings that Michael started up to kind of expand you know, from the great you know, task force that you set up down in Cayuga or down in Ithaca, and try to expand that for the whole lake and start talking about lake-wide management. And Sam, I know, was involved in that too. So so I would defer to that. I think we're in that realm where there's certain areas that we may be able to eradicate it, but I think when it's in the open lake like it is, it's difficult to actually get every last piece of hydrilla without some other help. So I think that it's more of a management in some respects, trying to keep it as concentrated on keeping it out of those highly valued areas and try to keep it down as much as possible, so it's doesn't have the potential to have that impact. But like I said, I will definitely defer to Kathy, who I saw unmuted. So I will let her kind of take over the reins, because I know she's been kind of leading that effort.
Thanks, Rich. So we've been talking about having a New York State Hydrilla Management Plan, which I mentioned in my presentation, creating a decision tool to basically discuss what would be a threshold for deciding to switch from eradication to maintenance or management. So we're still in the process of doing that, but as we're working on these larger scale projects, which we've been taking on, we definitely have, I think we also will start out with eradication, but based on the outcome of 2 to 3 seasons, that may shift to management. I can't give you definitive answers. As I said in the presentation, this varies from case study to case study, but in definitely in some projects, that is a consideration. It is on the table. I don't know that's an answer
Thank you.
okay, I did
No,
answer your
that's
question.
super helpful. Thank
Okay.
you. I did have one other question, which also might actually go to Kathy as well. Sorry about that, Rich. So originally, again, dredging was a topic. I mean, it's always a topic, right, in Ithaca, but it was a hot topic again around the time we found Hydrilla, and it was stalled because of the concern of moving tubers around. There's been a lot of success in the south end, but not complete a success. And dredging is coming up again. Should it still be stalled, or would there be special considerations that the DEC would impose if we actually get a dredging plan in place?
Wow. Okay, that was I was going to say. You really need to sit down with environmental permits to go through those details. I do find that it is quite pricey to do, but if it's a one and done, that would be great. So it's just a matter of figuring out if the permitting would be available, if that's an option that's appropriate. So again, I don't know all the ins and outs of that location, but if that's something you're considering, it's a small enough area that you can actually pull it off financially. I mean, that's something you can certainly entertain. Because we're talking about dealing with the 100-foot square area potentially at the mouth of the Owego Creek, in the upper Susquehanna. We just have to figure out if we can do that without actually having to put machinery into the water, which would be a whole other kettle of fish we don't want to touch. So it may be within reach from the shore. I don't know all the ins and outs. I'm not an environmental permitter, but I do know that there may be some issues with putting machinery in the water. I don't know if you've gotten far enough in your previous attempts that you've heard about that.
Oh, sure. It's a long-term conversation with the other divisions of DEC. It is
Okay.
actually is under DEC's purview, and it would be in the inlet,
Okay.
right down the middle, for a while. So it would be that bigger project. Okay, thank you, Kathy. Thank you.
Sure.
John Lorenzo, do you have a question? I see that you're unmuted.
Yeah, I hear there's a lot of talk about, all the successful, it's being very successful with the chemical treatments of treating hydrilla and that. But what can you tell us bass guys, about the effects of these chemicals on the fish and the microorganisms and everything else that's vital to the health of Cayuga Lake? And what about the impact on the chemicals on the native plants such as cabbage and coontail?
So at the concentrations that we're talking about, we have seen no impacts on coontail. And Valsinaria, only at higher concentrations is that getting affected, and that was in Ithaca where we had higher concentrations. We have not seen any impacts on the Valsinaria either, which is your take grass, eelgrass, really high quality stuff. It generally will not touch much of the larger pond weeds like white stem. There's a ton of that out there, clasping leaf. So it will affect the milfoil. It will have an impact on milfoil and hydrilla, and it will impact some of the smaller pond weeds possibly, but not at the concentrations we're using it at. The hydrilla and some of the other plants are the only ones that really are getting affected. That's why we're using it at the lower concentration, so that we're not getting into the spectrum where we would be impacting some of those other plants. And you can see that by going to the areas where the applications actually are, and the concentrations get diluted out to non-lethal very quickly. So you don't have a lot of secondary treatment of this where you're applying in one area and it's drifting and killing other areas. Like I said, and it's the type of herbicide we're using too. It's not a contact, quick acting type thing like you would see with an aquathol or with copper or with some of the other types of herbicides where you go out there and you can knock this stuff down within a couple of weeks. This is stuff that takes months to actually have the full effect. and to do that. As for the fish and the macroinvertebrates, the applications that we're doing at the levels we're doing are there's no fishing restrictions, and the impacts on mussels and macroinvertebrates is at the levels that we're talking are considered safe. So there's very low impact to those resources, which is one of the reasons why we ended up going with the herbicide we did, because it has such low impacts to the other resources. And like I said, there's no impact on the fish. There's no impact on the at the levels we're doing. You know, we're applying it. We could apply at much higher levels based on the label, but we're applying at much lower levels, just which would be considered safe, but we're applying at much lower levels than that, just because we're trying to concentrate on just hitting hydrilla and having as little impacts collaterally of any of the other ones. And yes, do we impact some of that vegetation? Yes, but like I said, not the ones, not a lot of the ones that you know that are out there that are important ones. The coontail, the valsinaria, and those types of plants are not at the concentrations we're at. They're not being affected by it. So,
Can I just make one more comment too?
sure.
I just want to let you guys know that our group, you know, our Facebook group, and the group of guys that I'm involved with, if there's anything we can do, or anytime that you guys want to go out on the lake or have anything like that, please use us. Don't just, you know, keep us off to the side and say, you know, well, they're a group of people that are concerned about the fishing. Yes, that's fine and that's true, but please, if there's anything we can do to help, please use us.
No, I mean, we went out with two of your members, and I think we had, I mean, Sam was out there with me, and so was Liz. I think it was a great exchange. Really enjoyed the interaction, and I think opened up, you know, there's some good questions. Listen, you guys use that resource, and you're out there all the time, so you see things that we're out there a couple times a month. I know Sam and his group is out there daily. You know, they're out there a lot as well, but you know, you can't be in all places at all times. So when you're out there, that's why we said, please get a hold of Liz, get a hold of Sam. We gave our contact information, contact us. We're more than happy to come back out, meet with you, and also to work with you. So, so no, yeah, I appreciate that. And I look forward to continuing to further on the relationships, and hopefully hopefully it's a two-way street. We help you, you help us. So I think that would be great, but I'll let Sam's got his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Rich, and thanks, John, for pointing that out. I think when we met with some folks from your group this summer, I think one thing that I really tried to and I think is still a great idea is getting folks involved with, like, there's very real things that people, active anglers on Cayuga Lake, can do to sort of fill some gaps in terms of just the macrophyte communities broadly. One of them, I think, a great, really easy way to get involved is to interact with our macrophyte survey program, which essentially encourages, trains, and you know, literally equips volunteers with the information and processes and training to actually identify plants within an ecosystem. So we typically have volunteers go out bi-weekly, throw a rake into the water, very similarly to the way that, you know, Rich's teams and Mike's teams and our teams are throwing rakes very regularly, and actually going through the processes to actually identify different species, how much of a species you're finding, where you're finding it. All of this stuff is really easy for us to integrate and kind of push out to volunteers. Doesn't matter, you could have almost no experience with science or identifying plants. You basically just look at a little handbook that we have, follow some really quick directions, download an app, and then you could literally be out there telling us what you're finding every single day. And I think that, to me, is a great way that your community can support what we are doing. Because I think at the end of the day, even though, like Rich said, we're out there all the time collecting data all over the lake, we can't be everywhere. You know, we don't know every single spot. You know, we don't know every single patch that is, you know, has more plants or less plants than previous years. But you guys can tell us that if you're out there every day. So I would encourage everybody to just reach out to me directly if you want more information about how you can take part. Maybe if there's like a training for a group of bass, you know, I could do a specialized training and kind of like a focused session if that was something that, if there is enough interest, I could kind of meet, you know, either in person or something like that and get people trained up, distribute the tools that are needed, you know, tell people how to do it. And we could literally have like a team of additional people out there in all these nooks and crannies that we don't know about, that you all do know about, you know, collecting really important information and data. So that's kind of my, you know, quick way to just at least get people involved.
Great, thanks so much, Sam and Rich and John. That was a great discussion, and I'll just, you know, second here that I'd encourage anyone who's interested to get involved in that macrophyte sampling program. The network's no longer doing the Hydrilla hunters coordination with volunteers, and the PRISM is doing this awesome job throughout the Finger Lakes and has these very excellent tools for training volunteers. So we could definitely talk about maybe a meetup in the spring or next summer to facilitate some of that. Would be really cool. Are there additional questions? I know that when we were out this summer, you know, that the folks we were with from the fishing community, and then Rich had some interesting takes, you know, on macrophyte trends and what you're seeing out there and what he's seeing out there this year. And then that was a really useful exchange also. And I learned a lot from both parties, just on how dynamic the system is, right? How much it's changing year to year, and based on, you know, the seasonal progression of macrophyte growth and plant growth. So I think we can continue to focus on understanding the ecology of our lake more and more through this management. Jean, jump on in there.
Given the zebra mussel infestations, hydrilla infestation, and the potential for climate change affecting the entire ecology of the lake, water temperatures, harmful algal blooms, et cetera, et cetera. How are those sort of things being factored into the long-term plans for invasive species management, in particular hydrilla? And as was mentioned earlier, if total eradication is probably unlikely in a lake this size, is there going to be at some point some minimum or maximum level of hydrilla that is you're going to just have to live with, you know, as the lake ecology changes with whatever kind of climate change is coming along?
Kathy, do you want to jump?
I'll jump in,
that?
sure.
Thanks.
So I do want to mention that we're starting to trend toward restoration efforts as well. So we've piloted some restoration projects on the Croton River, Croton Bay area, because that project was completed last year. Done a few restoration efforts along the Erie Canal as part of our Eastern Erie Canal project this year. So there may be room for, we're hoping for not just creating habitat for native animals, but also creating a competitive environment that could potentially outcompete hydrilla in some cases. Again, I don't have the research to completely back me up, but it seems like something that we need to dig into a bit more, and we'll have more and more capacity to do that as we build out this program. So that too would also help to address some climate change issues if we're introducing other species. But again, we're working through what nursery stock we need to have, how they would be propagated, what are the correct protocols or efficient protocols for getting them to become established in the areas. So there's a lot of questions we don't have answers for, but we're just starting to dive into that topic. So I think that could be helpful for dealing with climate change. So that's where I'll leave it for right now. It's a really tough question, and I appreciate your answering. I'm not answering, you're asking that question, and I don't have all the answers for you. I don't know that anyone does, but we are making an effort to do something that could be useful in that situation.
Yeah, Jean, that's a really great question. I think from our local perspective here with the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network, we're focused on stewardship across those areas of stress to our lake and watershed ecosystem, right? So we're, that's why we say those threats to our the resilience of the system come in many forms: climate change, pollution, and invasive species. And so we're trying to create opportunities for people locally to get engaged in whichever aspect of that calls to them the most, right? Because we need all hands on deck, since they're compounding. Those challenges compound in really complicated ways that we're just starting to understand, but we do know a lot of good options for actions that can be taken now as we grow to understand it a little bit better. Rich, how about from the perspective of the Corps on those compounding challenges? I mean, you're working in the Great Lakes also, and
yeah, I mean, climate resiliency is something that we are dealing with now with all of our projects that we're involved with. So it's not just invasive species controls, it's also any navigation projects, any flood control, any bank stabilization, anything that the Corps is involved with now has to definitely include that, those potential changes that are occurring. And I think Kathy brings up a good point. We do a lot of ecosystem restoration projects trying to incorporate not just hard armoring stuff, but we want to soften that, make it more into wetland type habitat or vegetated shallows, and have as much biodiversity in there as possible. Because what we find is that the disturbance or some of those things that happens from, be it a storm, be it an invasive species, stuff like that, the more diverse a habitat is, the more likely it is to be able to resist or to recover from that impact, and recover in a way that it doesn't get completely, have to be completely rebuilt. It'll do it naturally over time and lessen the likelihood that invasives will get in there, because unfortunately that's usually the type of habitat that they initially get in, is the marginal type stuff that the natives won't get into, or they grow a little faster in those areas, so they can kind of outcompete it and then start stretching out. So I think that was an excellent question, and it's something that all the agencies now are starting to wrestle with any of the management plans for a resource, or even just for when any projects that they're actually undertaking in those resources, is to look at not only what potential impacts your project will have, but what are the changes that you are expecting to see from other likely projects, as well as just from changes in the environment or changes in the biota. So I think that's a great question, and not an easy answer, but something that we're all wrestling with and trying to get a handle on.
great. Does anyone want to chime in with a final question or two? We have a bit more time, but I know you all have things you want to move on to in your day. It's only Monday. Okay. So I'm just gonna remind everyone that this is being recorded, and that as soon as that is available, we will circulate it to everyone who registered, including those who weren't able to join us today. You'll also see a survey come out from the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network, so that's a great place to put in additional questions if they come to you afterwards, or if you're watching the recording. And we'll just make sure you get connected to the right information. I'm really excited about some of the ideas that came up today and some ways to continue engaging members of our community in this work and in the lake ecology, addressing lake ecology questions going forward. Thank you so much to Rich, Sam, and Kathy for making the time to meet with us today. I think that was really important information that you shared, and it brings a lot of good context that folks can come back and reference as they learn more about Hydrilla. And yeah, thanks from the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network to everyone who attended. We're a local community-based organization, independent nonprofit, and we depend on the interest and excitement and support of community members. So if you want to learn more about our organization, you can go and visit www.cayugalake.org or shoot me a message at steward@cayugalake.org. And I hope to see you at some of our upcoming events, and have a great holiday season and stay in touch. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.